So let me introduce Lorna Slater, Scottish Greens candidate. We're delighted to welcome you tonight, Lorna. Thank you very much for coming along and speaking to people. Lorna was elected co-leader of the Scottish Greens in 2019, and she's standing for the Greens in the constituency of Edinburgh Northern and Leith, and she's second on the Lothian list in the Holyrood elections. She represented the Greens in the first TV election debate of this campaign on the BBC a week or two ago. You maybe saw her. Lorna was born in Canada. By profession, she is an electromechanical engineer and she works in tidal energy. According to our blog on the Edinburgh Greens website, Lorna says that with her recent TV appearances, she experienced imposter syndrome in the role of politician, which is so different from her professional role and identity as an engineer. Lorna's passionate about tackling climate change, as you would expect. And in Holyrood, she says she'll focus on building sustainable industries in Scotland and a just transition away from fossil fuels. The implementation of a Green New Deal and a Green Deal for workers are needed to overhaul how our economy works and ensure fair, well-paid jobs for generations to come. So I'm delighted to introduce not an imposter, but the real Lorna Slater.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that really kind introduction and for inviting me along tonight. So I apologize, I'm slightly more windswept and interesting than I'd hoped to be, but I managed to get outside into the sunshine for an hour or so to do some exercise, which was brilliant. Because the media on this campaign has really taken off. We haven't had this kind of coverage for the Greens before. And so I'm getting several interview requests a day, and that's, we hadn't quite calculated for that kind of pickup. So that's very exciting, but of course it's keeping me really busy. So getting outside was lovely. We announced a policy today that as a Yes for EU group, I would hope you'd be really excited about, which was that I was across in Rosyth today announcing our policy on reinstating the ferry from Rosyth to Europe. So I think someone said that we had ferries from Rosyth to Europe up until 2008, and then they were discontinued. So the ferry infrastructure is actually already there. There's a ferry terminal with on and off access for vehicles and for heavy goods vehicles. And how exciting would it be to reconnect Scotland to Europe? Because there's currently not regular ferry links like that. So reinstating a regular ferry links to Europe not only would give everyone in Scotland more options for holidays and for haulage, but it would give us zero or lower carbon options. So I gather that the issue there last time was that while the port and everything there is fine, the actual ferry itself was a very inefficient and old school gas guzzler. So we need some modern ferries there. And that would be super exciting. I really like this idea of building some better links to Europe. So Mark's done such a good job of introducing me. See if I can kind of fill in where we're at. So I live in the constituency of Edinburgh Northern and Leith. I live near the top of Leith Walk. I am, as she said, an electromechanical engineer. So I work for a company that builds tidal turbines. We're currently building the world's largest tidal turbine in Dundee, which will launch next week. Oh my goodness. So there's a lot going on. The team's working really, really hard there. I'm kind of supporting them remotely because of COVID. We're trying to minimize the number of people that are actually physically on site. It's the world's largest tidal turbine. So it's 73 meters long. It's 2 megawatts power. And it's been built, largely in Scotland. That has been assembled in the port of Dundee. It was welded together in Fife, and the steel was bought from Liberty Steel in Motherwell. So, and this is just one turbine. And we've kept the shipyard at Texo there busy for coming up to a good 18 months. And we've had hundreds of workers on it. Welders, fabricators, engineers, painters, crane operators, forklift drivers, hauliers bringing us equipment, safety inspectors, you name it. We've had loads of people working on this. And so this is a really good concrete example of what the next phase of developing Scotland's renewable energy potential looks like. We are at the cusp of a green energy revolution in Scotland. And I think it's an exciting future. I mean, if this is how many jobs and how much industry we can create around one turbine, imagine if it was 10 turbines or 50 turbines. We could keep not just the Port of Dundee busy, but Ferguson Marine busy, Bifab busy. we could, you know, use the facility up at Nig, north of Inverness, and start moving some of the infrastructure in Aberdeen over to building renewables as well. So there's a very exciting future there. We kind of just have to reach out and grab it, really. It's there waiting for us. So for me, the story of this election is a super positive one. We really have the power to make the future brilliant. We just have to choose for it to be so. We just have to decide that it's going to be so. The other thing I do, other than being co-leader for the party, which is a volunteer role, I don't get paid to do that. Neither does Patrick. Nobody gets paid. Nobody gets paid. We're all volunteers. I'm also a volunteer. I'm a trustee with the Edinburgh Remakery on Leith Walk, which is one of the vibrant social businesses that we have in Leith, which is dedicated to working on building the circular economy, which is a big part of kind of the vision for a sustainable future, a future where we don't take more from the earth than we put back into it. So it's all part of that kind of donut economics, where we have to balance what we take with, you know, how we build, how we rebuild, and how we help the earth to heal. So as Marek said, in this election, I'm the constituency candidate in Edinburgh Northern and Leith, and I'm second on the list after Alison Johnson, who's been an MSP for Lothian since 2011. Alison is one of our most accomplished MSPs and has many significant pieces of legislation to her name, including stopping the expansion of flight paths over Edinburgh, protection for Scotland's iconic mountain hares, the Young Carers Allowance, and legislation eliminating unnecessary and dehumanizing disability payment assessments. Alison spoke out starting last April for regular testing for care workers to help keep them safe at work. This policy was eventually enacted by the Scottish Government. Alison has also been a vocal advocate for increasing powers for local decision-making, including advocating that community councils have more powers and some responsibility for local budget decisions. So the pitch that we're coming into this election with is that only the Scottish Greens have the solutions for a fair and green recovery from this pandemic, which leaves no one behind. From fairer income taxes, free bus travel for young people, and a public sector pay rise, we have shown in the last 5 years that green votes make a difference. Our manifesto is to invest in renewable energy, public transport, warm homes, and protecting nature, creating tens of thousands of new well-paid jobs and rebuilding the public sector to address the urgent challenges that face our country. In this election, our future is at stake, with global science showing that we have only 9 years left before climate breakdown becomes irreversible. The Scottish Greens are the only party contesting this election with the practical solutions to address the climate emergency with the urgency it really requires. The clock is ticking. Our climate is already changing, causing raging forest fires, devastating floods, deadly heat waves, and mass extinction of species. The world is in trouble, and so is Scotland. Cut adrift from Europe without the powers we need to build a strong, equal, and green society, our economy is suffering as jobs disappear, inequalities grow, huge challenges face our education system and health services, and we struggle to begin a recovery from COVID. This is not the future we want for ourselves, for our children, or the wider world, and the Greens choose a different future. So in this election, Scotland has the opportunity to vote for the country it wants to be, leading Europe in renewable energy and driving down emissions. So we are asking you to vote like your future depends on it.
Thanks very much, Lorna. That's really interesting, and the tidal turbine sounds wonderful. I hope we get to see that somehow. Thanks very much. So we'll ask you some questions now, if that's okay. So these questions have all come in from participants that are here tonight. How will the Greens guarantee that EU citizens living in Scotland and being treated in a very poor way by the UK government will feel protected here? Will you consider a physical proof of the settlement scheme status until we go back to being an EU member?
So I will have to just look that up in the manifesto. One of the quick answers I can give is that it was a proposal from the Scottish Greens to ensure that everyone who is resident in Scotland can vote in this election. They can go vote in all upcoming Scottish elections. So that includes EU citizens, people with refugee status, and everyone over 16, and any citizen of any country who's got permanent residency here. So that's really exciting. It means that everyone gets to have their say. Nobody's excluded from the franchise in that way. So that's an exciting one. In terms of, let me see if I can look up the answer to your question. on EU citizens in the UK. Sorry, it's quite a long one. I'm just gonna, I obviously haven't been able to memorize everything. And no, it's a really good question. Like, it's something that we feel really strongly about.
I think the SNP,
in terms of the specific policy, I would have to just pull it up.
I think the SNP have promised something just very recently in terms of some sort of a card or something, which obviously wouldn't be from the official UK government, but I think they have. I think they've mentioned something. So
yeah, I mean, we're appalled by how the UK government has treated treated EU citizens, and obviously with the outcome of the Brexit election and stuff. So I haven't searched for a specific policy on that, but yeah, we're not at all happy with how the UK government is treating EU citizens. I know I have lost friends of mine who felt that they couldn't live here anymore and had to go back to the EU, and we had so many talented people. To be perfectly honest, as an immigrant here myself, one of the reasons I came here was because of the EU. So when I was a teenager, living in Canada, I am entitled to a British citizenship because my father's British. But it wasn't until Britain joined the EU that suddenly seemed like a good idea. And suddenly I remember as a 16-year-old, when my mom explained it to me, she's like, the world of opportunities is open to you. All you need is that passport, that EU passport, and you can go anywhere in Europe. You can study there, you can live there, you can work there, you can do anything you want. And it was like the golden ticket. And so I immediately applied for my British passport. And I was so proud to have it. It felt like, the land of opportunity had landed in my hands, the golden ticket. And now we've taken that away from our young people, and we've cut off that flow of talent, and that it's absolutely heartbreaking.
So, Lorna, question coming live this evening from Jonathan. If an independent Scotland rejoins the EU, we can assume that it will need a goods border to England with lorry parks, while removing the lorry parks being built on routes to Ireland. How would we sell that to people worried about borders?
Well, I think we have a bit of road to travel there before we start worrying about specific border policies. I mean, even in a sort of optimistic scenario of getting a referendum, as soon as COVID's under control, so maybe next year, we would still be looking at then having some sort of transitional arrangement of a couple of years and so on. And by that point, the position of the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, they may have established a more sort of standard way of dealing with that. We may have been able to negotiate a different arrangement where we're allowed to have different rules, that kind of thing. So I would guess that there would be extensive transitional arrangements around that. And then of course, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. It may be, and I sincerely hope it is, that one of the major parties will campaign at the next UK general election to at least rejoin the common market, even if they don't want to rejoin the EU, which would remove the need for that. So I think we're not playing with all the final pieces of the puzzle yet. I think we should move forward with positive intention. We all know we don't want a hard border. We all know we actually want the whole of the UK back in the EU. That's the only model that really makes any kind of sense. And we're on a bit of a journey to see how all these pieces fit together. So I think the situation is still fluid. So let's not get ahead of ourselves, one thing at a time. So the first thing we need to do is secure that referendum. And this next thing we need to do is come up with good policies around currency, around how we want to manage our economy, a proposed constitution. And then we need to pitch that. And then we need to win that. And then we need to look at not only what our route back is into the EU, but what the transitional arrangements would be with the UK and then with the EU. So we've got a lot of ground to cover before we need to worry about lorry parks.
Thanks, Lorna. I think Leslie wants to ask a question just now as well, if you don't mind. Go on, Leslie.
I was trying to put in the Q&A, but as host, I'm not allowed. So I'll ask live. I want to ask about public transport. I know that's a big policy of the Green Party. I live near Kinross in a very small village, and trying to connect small villages in this area to larger networks is very difficult and very costly because public transport is not that widely used. So how would the Greens go about transforming that? And the reason I ask is because I deliver leaflets around here and do all sorts, and every car has 3 or more cars in the driveways, and you know, there's just no other way to get around.
But I mean, that is a result of deliberate government policy. That isn't just the way it is. There is nothing particular about rural areas that mean that they need to be badly served by public transportation. That's a choice that the governments have made. And I think it's a poor choice. You know, closing down all the beaching railway lines, for example, was a poor choice. Privatizing local bus services was a poor choice. Stopping local councils from starting their own bus services is a poor choice. So there's a whole bunch of poor choices that have been made there that have resulted in this situation. And to be honest, I think people in rural areas should be more angry about this, because they let the government get away with this myth that it's just so difficult to do rural areas rather than a choice. Whereas I live in the centre of Edinburgh. I don't need to own a car. For £55 a month, I can get everywhere I want on buses and trams, anything like that. I pay the same tax as you do, but you have to have a car, an MOT, you pay tax on your fuel, you have to pay, you know, all these sorts of things, the motor vehicle tax. You are expected to contribute huge amounts of money from your own pocket for something I just get. So I think I think rural people have been very badly served by government decisions. And whenever governments talk about rural transportation, they just talk about roads, which is, again, taking money out of your pocket, making you pay for something that you should actually get as part of the sort of general taxation. So there's 2 elements to that. You know, part of it is reliable bus services, and also making that cultural change that it's normal to take the bus. We're calling for councils to be able to start their own bus services. We don't think transportation should be a profit-making enterprise. Roads, here's a top secret, roads don't make profits. So when people go, well, the bus service doesn't make a profit, like, neither do the roads. We don't expect them to. Why would we expect buses to? It's a public service. You know, so we're happy for roads to be paid for from general taxation, but without bringing in any revenue, whereas we expect bus services to, and that's not reasonable. So a total shift in how we think about that. And we've got, yeah, as I say, letting councils start their own bus services, committing to investment in that. You probably know we've won the policy of everyone 21 and under will get free bus travel all over Scotland starting this summer. So I think part of that will help the appetite for buses, because it not only helps young people, but families as well. So if you're taking the kids for a day out, the bus fare can be prohibitive, but now you can take them out. And what I think is exciting about those policies is it has these sort of little knock-on effects. Like, if you can take the kids to go see grandma a couple of extra times a year, how much does that do for grandma's well-being in terms of her mental health, meaning that she probably has a better quality of life and is less likely to get ill. And then you're just checking up on her, making sure she's okay. And, oh, her boiler's leaking. We'll just check that out. Do you know what I mean? So like, it just enables those kind of human connections that keep us all going and work on our own well-being and mental health, which are not measured anywhere, but good public transport does allow that. The other piece of that puzzle is our Rail for All plan. So we've got a fully costed and researched £22 billion Rail for All program, which would upgrade railways all over Scotland, so rural railways as well as, you know, the Central Belt. This would bring us much more in line with the quality of services that we see in other European countries. It will create tens of thousands of jobs, and it's one of these kind of 3-way wins, creates loads of jobs, boosts the economy, as well as all that well-being stuff I just talked about. It improves quality of life, all that well-being stuff, and it will reduce our carbon emissions by getting people out of their cars. So these are almost kind of no-brainer policies. And because this is technology that exists, like railroads are a known thing, we know that every pound we invest in this will boost Scotland's economy by 1.6 pounds. So this isn't spending, this is investing. And this is exactly what we need to both come out of the COVID crisis. You know, to have a sort of a proper recovery will require investment, but it also is exactly what we need to deal with the climate catastrophe. So, or to prevent climate catastrophe, because we can prevent it. It's totally doable. We've just got to, you know, pick the right policies and commit to them.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lorna. We might well come back to environmental questions, actually, because we have got more. However, oh, and I just want to say, yeah, I absolutely agree with you about well-being and how hard it is to measure in terms of, you know, good public transport, because I know that people of my generation, you know, when we get the bus pass, I know you find it hard to believe I've got a bus pass.
I do find it hard to believe. I do.
But it is absolutely, it really is fantastic, and I know that elderly people really appreciate it. They you know, they talk about it endlessly. Oh, the bus pass is wonderful.
That's really good. I'm glad to hear that. Well, hopefully young people will be just as excited about it, and will kind of normalize bus travel as the way to get around.
Oh yeah, it really opens up opportunities for you. You know, you go to places you never thought you might travel to just to see what they're like.
That's really cool. I love that.
And broaden your horizons.
From the young people's point of view, I think it will be very transformative, because I've always lived rural, and the cost of buses was absolutely ridiculous for my children to travel around when they were younger. So that would make a massive difference.
So good for families as well, yeah. So if it's all right, I'm going to change the subject now and ask you something completely different. So this one is completely different. Do you agree that vulnerable women who are afraid that they may be confronted by able-bodied men who self-identify as women in women's toilets and other safe spaces should not be welcome in the Scottish Green Party?
Sorry, can you start again with that? It was quite convoluted there.
Yeah. Okay. So it's about it's obviously about the GRA, and women who are afraid they might be confronted by men identifying as women in safe women's spaces, should they not be welcome in the Scottish Green Party?
So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in that question that I have real problems with. So, I mean, that question is a transphobic question. It is presuming that trans women are men who exist for the purposes of harassing women. And it's just not a view I subscribe to. So I'm kind of not comfortable answering that question in the same way that I wouldn't be comfortable answering a question that was openly racist. So it's not a question I'm comfortable asking. What I will tell you is our position on trans rights. So we are very strong on trans rights because trans rights are human rights. All humans have the same rights. When Black people got the right to vote in America, nothing was taken away from white people. When women got the right to vote, men didn't lose anything. Human rights are not a give and take. We all have the same rights. And trans rights is a matter of human rights. So I will state plainly that the Scottish Greens believe that trans women are women, that trans men are men, and that non-binary identities are perfectly valid and should be legally recognized. And you know, there's kind of not any more discussion I'm willing to have on those points.
Okay, Jan. Okay, Lorna, thank you for that. Question from Jan. How open are the Greens to supporting new models of housing, such as co-housing, which offers choice, sustainability and affordability, common in Europe, but not in Scotland? Absolutely.
So this is something I'm very excited about. I had a great meeting last week with the UK Cooperatives group. I don't know if co-housing is exactly the same as cooperative, but I'm assuming it's a more cooperative model. I'm very excited about it. There's a lot of ways in which the UK housing market, and certainly Scotland's housing market, is behind what they're doing in Europe and behind the European model. And one of them is housing cooperatives. Another one is the sort of self-build model. So the way the UK works is that we let developers do all the building. And so they, of course, build whatever will make them the maximum profit. So they build the smallest, cheapest, crappiest things they can sell at the highest price, which means we have low quality housing. Whereas if we did what they do in Europe and made it easier for people to build their own houses, of course, if you're building your own house, you build something that's practical, that's cost effective, that is, you know, that's going to be something you're going to really want to live in for many, many years. So you really think about it. You're not just trying to throw something up to make a profit on it. So there's a whole bunch of stuff around our housing model. And yeah, cooperative housing is something I'm very, very excited about as a model. There's some other more radical ones as well. Have you heard of something called the Baba Yaga house? They've done them in Paris, but it's not like a crazy idea, but basically older women get together and buy a property and kind of do it up as a co-housing space, particularly you know, older women, if they maybe lost their husbands and find themselves single, rather than living on their own, get a place together and set it up as a cooperative housing project. And not only can they sort of then look out for each other, but they're part of a really vibrant community of their own. And that is definitely what I want to do when I'm an old lady, is join a Baba Yaga house. So yeah, I'm really interested in housing cooperatives. It's something I've committed to joining the cross-party, assuming I'm elected in 3 weeks' time, joining the cross-party group on cooperatives and looking more into that. So anyone who's interested in that kind of thing, please, once I'm an MSP, please contact me at my MSP address about that, and let's get to work on some policies around that.
That's great. That's really interesting. Thanks. And we don't see enough publicity about it, do we? So that was a good one. Okay, so I've now got something completely different. What are the Scottish Greens plans about how to get rid of Trident?
Oh, yeah. So I mean, there's a few different elements to that. The first one, I think, is the sort of commitment to getting rid of it, the kind of concept of being nuclear free. And then the second part of that is practically, where does it go? Is it decommissioned in the Clyde? Is it relocated to somewhere in England? What does that actually mean? Do we cede that bit of land to England so that they can still have their nukes on there? I don't know how that works practically. In terms of a direction forward, it's so disappointing to me that the UK is still committed to nuclear weapons, especially as the UN has now ratified the International Treaty on banning them. And it's only a few countries that are still like really addicted to nuclear weapons that still even have them. It's just such an absurdity to me that we spend millions and I mean billions, honestly, of pounds on a weapon system that we can't ever actually use. And you know, as a party that's concerned with both peace and the environment, let's not kid ourselves. A nuclear weapon going off anywhere in the world would do as much damage as the climate crisis, but in a matter of hours. It's terrible for the war is terrible for the environment. There is no way those weapons can be used. So we're just burning all that money off. And I think there's very much an element of the military industrial complex has a lot of lobbying power, and there's a kind of toys for boys like nuclear, you know, Boris Johnson has managed to find in his budget money for nuclear weapons, but not enough money to pay nurses. He's managed to find money for a new plane with Union Jacks on it, but he's putting 8% cuts into his public services. Yeah, Rishi Sunak didn't say that on the telly, did he? You know, like, so none of this is a question about how much money is available or what's appropriate and to keep us safe. It's all about this sort of post-imperial kind of image of Britain as a global power, which is just absurd. Like the whole thing's ridiculous. And some people say, oh, we need it to keep the Russians at bay. But like, the Russians are not going to nuke us. They're going to hack our elections. Do you know what I mean? Like we're fighting old battles with weapons we can never use. The whole thing's absurd. So yeah, so the first thing is to commit to getting rid of them. And I agree that as long as we're part of the UK, that won't happen. So I mean, that should be one of the first things we do as an independent country, is sign that UN treaty on the banning nuclear weapons. And then we need to get into negotiations, probably as part of the independence arrangement, as to what happens with those. And that is a difficult question, because as far as I know, England doesn't have anywhere to put them safely, you know, because they require special facilities and so on. So there would have to be a long drawn out negotiation on decommissioning them or relocating them. And to be honest, that's actually one of the cards we have in our sleeve in terms of negotiating with the UK, because there's quite a lot of chat around, oh, we'd have to take on so much of their debt and stuff. We don't. Clues in the name. We don't have to take on that debt. It's their debt. They spent that money. They're the continuing nation. They keep the assets and they keep the debt. We're the new nation. That's not a thing. We don't have to take on any of that legally, but we might choose to, just as a sort of gesture of goodwill or something. So, you know, what do we do with the nukes becomes one of the negotiating cards on the table, along with what do we do with common assets and what do we do with the debt and things like that. So it would just have to be subject to the negotiation. What I'd be interested in is actually hearing from people who know the industry to find out what the possibilities are. Are there deep water ports in England or Wales that could take them? Is it possible to decommission them here? Because I mean, we could just say, we'll just start taking them apart, come and get them, or we're going to scrap them and see what happens.
Okay, thank you for that, Lorna. Could you tell us about the Scottish Greens position on universal basic income?
My absolute favorite policy. So I was asked yesterday by a reporter if I was First Minister for the day, although it would be only half of the First Minister, because Patrick Harvey and I share the post. If I was half of the First Minister for the day and could make any change in law without any consequences, what would I do? And my answer was I would implement a universal basic income. So in our manifesto, we have committed to some trials of it, but it's definitely something we want to implement in the long term. And I'll tell you why. And it's because I think it's one of those things that is transformational in terms of how our economy works. And that is what we need to tackle the climate crisis, to tackle the sort of worst excesses of capitalism, and to deal with issues like automation. The universal basic income is what we need, because what we're finding is that, you know, in automation, an engineer like me can make a machine that will put 10 people out of work through no fault of their own. That machine doesn't get pregnant, it doesn't get sick, it doesn't take holidays, and the company that owns that machine is making more profits than ever. But because it doesn't have to pay anybody, those profits then disappear out of the economy, you know, into offshore tax havens and yachts and luxury houses, instead of going to workers who would then spend the money in our economy. So universal basic income is another way to cycle that money back into the economy, because an economy isn't just about accumulating profit. An economy only works if the money recirculates through it. The pound in the pocket of the working man or working woman is boosting the economy. A pound in the pocket of a millionaire who's, you know, for his second yacht or something is not a boost to the economy, it's a drain on the economy. And so universal basic income is one of those ways we can keep that money moving through the economy. And of course, it has all the added benefits of making sure that nobody is ever destitute, that especially people with precarious work always know where at least some of their income will come every month. And on the trials they've done of it, that kind of, people can kind of just breathe out the mental stress of years of not knowing if you will have enough hours worked this week to feed your kids, to pay the bills, to keep food on the table. The stress of that makes people ill. It's a burden on our NHS. It's a terrible burden on our society. Poverty is a grinding, damaging thing. Poverty is very expensive for our society. If we could eliminate, you know, dire poverty through something like a universal basic income, the payoff for that would be less cost on our NHS, less cost for our mental health, less kind of makeup that our schools would have to do with dealing with children who are suffering from all the sort of grinding effects, where people would live longer, they'd be healthier. I think it would have all these really positive knock-on effects. So yeah, very keen on that. Think it could be transformational. There's a lot of chat around, and as there should be, around what the amount should be set at, what's appropriate for an adult, what's appropriate from a child. Do you give it to all citizens, all residents, all, how, you know, there's a lot of chat around exactly how it would be managed, how it would be funded. But these are the right questions to be asking. And I look forward to seeing the data from the pilot projects that we should be, I mean, there's already some going in Scotland, but some more of those to get some really good data on it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Lorna. And also, I mean, thanks for mentioning the links with education and the ability of children to learn, you know, if they're hungry, which we know is you know, is
and stressed out by stressed out parents. Like, yeah, poverty is a brutal thing. And when we put people in poverty, as we do in this country, who are working because we don't pay living wages, that means people are working, trying to piece together enough money to live on through several different jobs that they then have to manage and juggle. And then what if the kid gets sick or the dishwasher breaks down, or, you know, how do you deal? So every day feels like a terrible crisis, which grinds down people's mental health and their physical health, and means that they age before their time. And as you say, they don't, you know, the kids don't get the kind of secure, relaxed home that they deserve to have.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with you. I definitely couldn't put it better myself. So I'm going to ask you another question about education, because some of your manifesto proposals are, some of them are quite radical, I think.
Oh, good. We like radical.
Okay, the particular one that caught my eye is a Okay, I'll read you the question. Some of your plans for reforming education are radical. For example, getting rid of exams in favour of coursework, that's continuous assessment of students' work. If you get rid of exams, will you find support for this from parents, employers and students themselves?
I mean, I think that we can all agree that the Scottish Greens will be a party of opposition and not a party of government. So it's not like we're going to be able to snap our fingers and just get rid of exams like that. But what I think we'd like to campaign for and work towards is a more balanced kind of assessment. I mean, I know from my own experience, my best friend at university is an excellent engineer. He's very systematic, he's methodical, he really understands things, and he does terribly in exams because he works through things really slowly. And so the kind of time pressure of exam means that his grades were always poor. But actually, if I wanted to know something and understand it, I would go ask him how to do it. I test really well because I can cram the information in my head, sit there and regurgitate it on the paper. But do I remember it? Not really. So the exam isn't a good assessment of how much you know or how well you're able to apply it. It's a bit of an arbitrary measure. And I think we've come far enough in education theory and education practice to be able to find more practical ways to assess people that really, you know, get to the bottom of their understanding and ability. This, rather than sort of batching children up and then grading them and sending them off into the world as if we have assessed them fairly, I don't think that's reasonable. So I think there's some conversation to have around how we manage that and around that. But as my colleague Ross Greer points out, we've now coming into our second year without any, you know, national exams, and the world has failed to fall apart. Do you know what I mean? Like, world's still going on. So maybe if we can do it without it for 2 years, maybe we can do without them forever. It's worth thinking about.
Okay, thank you for that, Lorna.
Could I just add a little comment at the end there? Hopefully it wouldn't mean that teachers had to do all the extra assessment unpaid. That's the problem, isn't it, with the continuous assessment? So there would need to be some sort of workload model so that all that extra work of assessment doesn't fall on teachers instead of on the SQA.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's one of the things that's well known that Scottish teachers have the highest contact time of any in Europe or something like that, which means they already have less time to do that kind of preparation and assessment. And that's something we need to tackle. That's not fair because, you know, I really respect teachers as professionals. And I think that teachers, my mom's a teacher and she goes on about this at length about teachers know what's right for their classes and should be able to not only set the coursework, but go along with their instincts on what the class is interested in, what's inspiring them as well, rather than having to, in using their own judgment and expertise, rather than kind of having to follow a tick box model that makes every classroom the same when they're not the same. So yeah, I mean, the Finnish model, I think, is the direction of travel here, where teachers have much more responsibility and authority and much more time to plan what they're doing. Teachers drive the education system rather than bureaucrats or politicians.
Thanks for that, Lorna. So comment for the audience, if you could keep the questions coming, please. We're doing our best to get through as many of them as possible, but keep submitting them. So Lorna, question from Jill. Some of Scotland's best resources to trade with the EU are food and drink. But if we're going to stop climate breakdown, don't we have to stop eating meat and fish?
I sincerely hope not. I think probably we need to eat less of them. I'm definitely in favor of the model, and I think this is true, that agriculture is not the problem here, but it's definitely part of the solution. So there's a brilliant paper out, which you can find online. I think it's called Farming 1.5, which is a paper about how farming in Scotland could be made more sustainable. And there's a whole bunch of elements around this, around our models for how we make, where food comes from, where it's grown, how far it's transported. I mean, we don't necessarily use all our land very well in Scotland. Quite a lot of our land, for example, is things like grouse moors, which are not only ecological deserts, but they're pretty economically barren too. Just about anything you do with a grouse moor is better both for the environment and for the economy. So for example, converting that land to sustainable agriculture would mean that it absorbs more carbon out of the atmosphere, as well as producing local foodstuffs, which means that we aren't having to transport them as far, which would reduce our overall carbon footprint. So I think there's a whole lot here to go to look at. It's a big project to revisit how Scotland feeds itself, how these networks of food are connected. Should we have more local food cooperatives? Should we get away from the kind of supermarket dominant model where, again, it's a profit extraction model, which leaves so many farmers really struggling, and encourages things like abusive behavior toward animals because everybody's trying to maximize profit. Nobody is trying to maximize quality. And I think one of the real shames of Brexit is that it undermines so much of the work that our farmers have done and our food producers have done to produce quality goods with good track records on animal rights, with good track records on environmental matters. Because as you all will know, without the European standards on animal welfare and environment and stuff, we are now at the mercy of either Boris Johnson's Tories or whatever it is the Americans want when we finally have to come around to doing a trade deal with them, as we all know we will have to, because there are 3 superpowers in the world and no small country, and let's not pretend that the UK isn't now a small country, relatively speaking, you have to connect up with one of the global superpowers. Well, we've managed to piss off the EU, and China's not very happy with us because we're menacing them with an aircraft carrier with no planes on it. Yes, good thinking. So it'll have to be a trade deal with the US, which would have us, as you guys all know, dragging down our environmental standards and animal welfare standards further, which is such a shame for our agriculture sector and food producers. So yes, it's one of those things that leads me feeling to despair, but definitely motivates me to campaign both for an independent Scotland and to get back into the EU, is to protect these really vital industries and work with them, because as I say, I think they're part of the solution to help us reduce our emissions and be responsible for climate crisis. The fish one is slightly different because I think that the state of fishing worldwide is such that we have overfished the planet to the point that, I mean, this isn't Scottish green policy, but it's my personal view that basically fish isn't sustainable. The EU, that's one of the parts of the EU that I thought was really bad, is the common fisheries policy. It allowed the EU to ignore scientific advice on the catch and meant that we've overfished our waters horrendously. So my personal view is that we should be eating almost no fish, and we need to let our marine environments restore themselves. To be honest, healthy marine environments take a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere as well. So that's something that I would like to see. I mean, we've done quite well with the Scottish Greens. We've introduced marine protected areas. We've stopped kelp dredging. So we've tried to minimize the kind of damage to our marine areas, but I think there's a lot more we could do there. With the farming and stuff, I think there's a lot we can do to reduce emissions. I think a lot of people are eating less meat, and a lot of people are eating no meat and no animal product, and good on them for doing that. It's something I'm willing to kind of learn more about and investigate all about, but it's not something I'm willing to kind of put a blanket no more meat on, just like that.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Lorna. And here's another environment one. How is the planning for COP26 going? Do you think that this important international conference can be a success while the Tories are in control of it?
Can be or will be. I have to confess, I'm very cynical about COP26. I mean, we're supposed to be all very excited about it because Scotland leading the way, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I think Scotland can lead the way on a lot of, in climate stuff, especially around our renewable energy. But as you say, with the Tories in charge of it, I'm worried that it will be a whole bunch of greenwashing, setting targets without plans, a whole bunch of rich white men patting themselves on the back without actually making any sort of changes. So yeah, I'm very cynical about it. And I'm going to do a bit of name dropping here. My friend Christiana Figueres, I don't know if you know who that is. She's the woman who negotiated the Paris Agreement. She led the UN committee that did that, and I met her. I went to the Antarctic with her, and she's amazing, as you'd probably expect a woman like that to be. And she doesn't go to the COP because she's so cynical about them, because they're kind of a chance for big business lobbyists to lobby government about how little things should change, or worse, the oil and gas industry, like here, they're such cheap bastards. They're like, oh, well, we already take more taxpayer money in subsidy than we pay in taxes, but you have to give us some more money in order so that we can become greener. It's like, yeah, anyway, so very cynical.
Okay, thanks for that, Lorna. That's quite interesting, because the perception, you know, people's perception, public perception of COP26 is very, very important. So anyway,
No, I mean, it is important in the sense that this is the countries of the world coming together to potentially make decisions that are now make or break for us, because we as a planet have 9 years to fundamentally change our approach. But in the years since the last COP, in the years since the Paris Agreement, as Greta Thunberg says, nobody's done anything. Nobody's even tried. You know, like all the countries said, oh yeah, we'll keep global warming to 1.5 degrees. Yeah, knowing full well that that was signing them up to reducing emissions by about 6 or 7% every year, which they failed to do. We're now at the point where to meet those targets, we have to reduce emissions by more like 10% a year. Do we, like, really? Boris Johnson's gonna go, yeah, we'll stop all this road building. We're gonna like stop building third runways. We're gonna absolutely, like, the idea that Boris Johnson's gonna sign up to that stuff. Now, what I hope is that the other countries of the world will take it seriously. This is their chance to do so, and will pressure the UK to do the right thing. Because you know, we are getting to make or break time with this. If 10% is a lot. If we're going to reduce emissions by 10% every year, we've got to start, you know, get moving on it. So yeah, we'll be there, of course, and doing our best to kind of lobby everyone and pressure everyone into it. But I just don't think that Boris Johnson understands the climate crisis or even gives a damn about it.
Let's stick with that theme for a moment. So somebody asked us in advance, how soon can we expect to be able to use piped hydrogen for domestic heating?
Ugh.
But I'd ask that you take that a little bit broader. I mean, do you buy hydrogen as a green fuel, or do you think it's the last gasp of the oil and gas industry?
So I think there's a lot to unpack there as well. So I used to work in MEMS before I moved into renewable energy. And one of the chemicals we used in that industry for etching silicon chips was hydrogen. Hydrogen is explosive at more than 4 parts per million. I do not want hydrogen pumped into my house. I promise you that. I used to have to do an enormous amount of leak testing on the systems that I use, hydrogen leak testing. My experience as an engineer tells me that hydrogen is a really dangerous substance, and you absolutely do not want it in your home. So no, I don't think we're going to see hydrogen piped into people's homes. I think that the right answer for domestic heating and cooking purposes is electrification and things like ground loop and air loop heat pumps. And we know those work. Again, I hate all this depending on technology that doesn't exist yet to solve the climate crisis, when actually there's technology that already exists and works really well. I mean, Sweden was able to get their entire country's domestic heating systems to zero carbon. I think it was in 2019 or last year. So they did it. They started doing it 10 years ago, and they did it through community heating schemes and ground loop heat pumps and upgrading homes and they just did a nationwide program on it, and they did it. It's done. It can be done. And they did it without hydrogen. You don't need hydrogen. Now I think hydrogen has a place. One of the advantages of hydrogen is that you can use it to store energy and transport it around. So one good use of hydrogen would be for ferries between the Orkney Islands, for instance. So in Orkney, you could produce lots of electricity cheaply from wind or tidal energy, make it into hydrogen, and use the hydrogen to power the ferries around. That would be nice, clean, green energy. It's a perfect use for hydrogen. What's not good use of hydrogen is burning diesel fuel to make it. And I don't buy this blue hydrogen stuff. Oh, well, it's just temporary. We're just going to use natural gas to make some hydrogen, and it'll all be better soon. It's not a step on the path. It's a diversion from the path. We should be electrifying now. We don't need to wait. We already produce 97% of our domestic electricity from renewable resources. By just increasing that, by letting that industry continue to expand, we will start eating into our fossil fuel use. So as electricity becomes cheaper, people will move over to cheaper electrical heating systems and electrical cooking systems, and we can nudge that along by insisting that all new homes have electric boilers in them, by giving people grants to remove gas boilers. That kind of policy, we can sort of nudge that along. So no, I don't think hydrogen for sort of general use is good, but I think there are some very specific applications where it's excellent.
Thanks. I've learned an awful lot about hydrogen in the last couple of minutes. Thanks for that. We've just got time for, I think, maybe another couple of questions. So one from me and one from David, I think. So I will ask this one from one of our members. In general, what are Green's proposals for immigration laws if there's a mandate for India F2?
So I don't quite understand the question. Do you mean what would we put in our manifesto for independence?
Yes, about immigration.
Okay, so I think, yeah, so we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit there in terms of we think immigration should be devolved because we think Scotland has different immigration requirements than the rest of the UK. So that's kind of step one. Scotland needs to have its own, but in sense of what exactly immigration law would look like after independence, I can't say at this point. We don't have a manifesto on that. So the manifesto that we produced this week is not a manifesto for independence. It's a manifesto for a fair and green recovery from the COVID pandemic, which is largely based on investment in public transport, upgrading homes, and renewable energy. So, but part of that recovery from COVID is that we feel that the people of Scotland should be given the choice as to who makes the decisions about the recovery. Should it be, obviously I'm asking this question in a very loaded way, Boris Johnson's Brexit Tories in London that none of us voted for, or should it be a Scottish government that we did vote for? So, I mean, you know, so at this point, what we're campaigning for is the right to ask that question and the right to campaign for. Unfortunately, I don't have a manifesto that says exactly what our immigration policy would be after. But obviously, rejoining the EU would be our policy. So we would want to reinstate freedom of movement with the EU as quickly as possible. And then beyond that, in terms of what our relationships were with other countries, I couldn't say, although as an immigrant myself, I am very much in favor of free movement. And hypothetically, Greens are in favor of abolishing all borders and letting people move around. But that's sort of more of a hypothetical one than a practical one.
Okay, thank you. And last question. It's entirely feasible, Lorna, that the outcome of this election is that your party, the Scottish Greens, holds the balance of power. If that were the outcome, which policies would you absolutely insist that the SNP adopted and enacted in order to gain your support?
So I'm going to go into this one a bit more. So the SNP government has been a minority government all this last term, which means that for any particular piece of legislation, they always need another party to work with. And despite popular mythology, it isn't always us. It isn't even mostly us. Certainly in the 2018 to 2019 parliamentary term, the SNP and the Tories voted together more often than they voted with us. So it's kind of a myth that we support all their legislation. It's actually not true. We oppose quite a lot of what they do. We considered that the Tories, the SNP voting with the Tories, for example, on the planning bill was a massive stitch up. They sided with developers against communities. There was some stuff that happened during COVID that we weren't very happy about. Their consultation on COVID support plans involved landlords, but not tenants. You know, so the SNP team up with the Tories over and over again to do things that just outrage the Greens, like ducking puppy dogs' tails and, you know, like just things that drive us crazy. So it isn't really a question that we have the balance of power. Whichever party the SNP wishes to work with on legislation has the balance of power, and they do work with the Tories an awful lot. They are not a progressive party inherently, but when they do work with us, we are able to push them into more progressive policies. Like I think Nicola Sturgeon herself is a progressive person, but not all the elements of her party are. So we prefer when they work with us because we can push them into fair and greener things, but they don't always do that. So going into the next parliament, my expectation is that it will be a similar sort of situation with a minority government where the SNP once again have to choose who they work with on different policies, and they may choose to work with the Tories on things like land or, you know, developments. What I don't know, but they, you know, we would obviously support policies around independence, and we have a history of being a constructive opposition in our budget negotiations. So, I mean, I can imagine it continuing like that. There's been a lot of media speculation about a coalition government, but I can assure you there's been no chat about that. Officially, that's not an official thing. That has just been chat in the media. And I'm not completely sure what would be gained by a coalition government. we're a long way apart from the SNP on a lot of issues. Like, they are still talking maximum oil and gas extraction from the North Sea. They are not interested in radical land reform. You know, I can kind of go on, but there's a lot of areas that we don't match up on. So I think that a coalition government isn't really on the cards. We'll have to see. Like, I mean, we'll have to see how the votes go. What if the SNP invited us? You know, if they wanted to make a coalition government, it has worked in other countries. The Greens are in coalition with Jacinda Ardern's party in New Zealand. Greens are in coalition governments around Europe. It can work, but to be perfectly honest, it isn't something we're seriously looking at the moment. At the moment, we're just trying to get as many Green MSPs in so that we can have as much influence in the next parliament as possible, and as many pro-Indy people in parliament as possible.
Right, thanks a lot for that then, Lorna. So with perfect timing, it's just coming up to 7 o'clock. And I just want to say thank you ever so much. That was fantastic to hear about the Greens' views on such a wide range of issues. Fantastic range of issues, actually. And I don't think we've ever had so many questions submitted or such a variety for any of our other events. So thanks to everybody for submitting your questions. And I'm really sorry if your question didn't get asked. It was simply because there were so many of them, and we were trying to select, you know, a nice variety. So thanks very much for that. And if anybody's taken part in this is not a member, do consider joining up. Just go to the website. And also, of course, if you're a member, if you join our mailing list, you'll hear about upcoming events. So we may have another election-related webinar or hustings coming up in the next couple of weeks. Also, we've got a Europe Day event. That's post-election event, and that will be focusing on Europe and focusing on future relationship between Scotland and the EU, and we might have a better picture of how that might work out at that stage. So that just remains for me to say thanks again to everyone, and thanks ever so much, Lorna. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a lovely weekend, everyone.
Thanks. Good night, everyone.